So Rita, when you're guiding and consulting and coaching the senior leaders with whom you work, how do you help them accept the idea that there will be bumps and dings and failures along the way? I mean, it's one of those things that's easy to talk about. I mean, I've heard Nadella talk about that. I've heard Mike Abrashoff in his book saying, look, there are above the waterline mistakes and below the waterline mistakes, and above the waterline mistakes is how we learn and we grow. And all of that is good in theory, and in practice, in the moment to moment basis, you're like, I don't want any mistakes on my watch because it's ugly and it's messy and it's expensive and it feels diminishing. How do you help your leaders hold that space for the messiness that comes with this approach to strategy?
Yeah, well, I talk about the concept of an intelligent failure.
Hmm.
And making that distinction between an intelligent failure and the other kind in advance. So,
Right.
an intelligent failure is a case of something was planned carefully. So, if it didn't work out the way we were hoping, we know why, right? So, cardinal
Hmm.
sin there is if it's not planned carefully and you don't know why you failed, well, then you really haven't learned anything and you don't want to encourage that. But if it was planned carefully and you knew what was happening, that's the first thing. Secondly, you were able to do it cheaply. You were able to do it quickly. You knew what the outcomes were, and the cost to do the learning was commensurate with the value of the learning. So the way I try to get them to reframe it is don't think so much of being right, because in an uncertain situation, and I think right now this is a message everybody's got to hear, uh, we're not going to be right now because all the rules have changed. Everything's up in the air.
Right.
Nobody knows. Not you, not me, not the president, not the prime minister. Nobody knows.
Right.
So the best we can do is articulate what our assumptions are. And if we can agree in advance that this is a reasonable set of assumptions and I'm going to make an investment in learning what the next step
Mm.
is, then the question is, was what I learned worth the investment? Not did I try something because I thought I was going to be right and I failed.
The other challenge that I see leaders falling for is the the desire to keep scaling their response, to go big or go home.
Mm.
And you've recently had an article in HBR called Discovery Driven Digital Transformation. And one of the lines you got in there that really resonated for me was, just because a threat is huge doesn't mean that the response has to be.
Mhm.
And this is the thesis of that article, as in this conversation now, which is actually small steps where you keep reorienting and you keep taking in new information and you keep re-navigating based on the new content that's coming in. This is what influenced the lean business movement and the MVP approach. And yet people are going, yeah, but why don't we go big here? Why don't we overinvest? Why don't we kind of bet the farm? Because that was one of those phrases from, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, which is like, that's how you prove you're a leader. You take these bet the farm risks. How do you counsel people to play it small and take these smaller steps, rather than trying to go all in just to kind of prove their manhood?
Well, I'm never a big fan of, going all in just to prove your manhood. So here's the thing. And I think Jeff Bezos makes a great distinction here. He says, there are two types of decisions. So type one decisions are irreversible, high risk, bet the company, bet the farm kinds of decisions. And those need to be approached with a great deal of consideration and care because,
Hmm.
that you can't reverse them. Type two decisions are reversible. If you walk through a door and you don't like where you got to on the other end, you just turn around and walk back through the door again.
Yeah.
They're reversible. They're relatively low risk. They're not going to commit you to something that you don't really want to be pursuing. So I do think there are times in strategy where you do need to make a big bet the farm kind of decision. And if you think about the big corporate shifts, so Intel,
Right.
abandoning memory and going into microprocessors, or Adobe abandoning
Yeah.
the shrink wrapped software. I mean, those are
Moving to
big,
subscription. Yeah.
irreversible, decisions. And I think both of those companies, gathered a lot of information. And I think this is the distinction I'd encourage your leaders to think about, which is big irreversible decisions, when you've gathered a tremendous amount of information and the patterns are now clear, that makes sense. That's very strategic. But big irreversible decisions when you've got just basically assumptions is the road to folly. And that's what actually led to the original discovery driven idea, which was I study corporate flops. And I have a file in my office called my flops file. And you have to lose your parent company at least $50 million to get into my flops file. That's the deal. And what I found was...
It's an exclusive club, but probably not as exclusive as we'd all like it to be.
Exactly. But, even smart companies, I mean, Disney, when they first went to Europe, right, made a lot of assumptions about how the theme park would be used that didn't turn out to be. It was
a disaster for the first number of years, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. But it wasn't that they're a stupid company or they don't know how to operate theme parks. It's just Europeans don't behave the way Americans do when they're in a theme park. And so what we saw was this pattern, untested assumptions taken as facts, very few opportunities to learn through low commitment tests, leaders, irrevocably committed to a given course of action, typically all the funding up front, and typically a real kind of train start mentality. So we're going to put all these resources and everything on this train, and we're just going to head off in a single point direction. And when you're in a highly uncertain context, that's a very risky way of going about things.
Hey, it's MBS here. I love to answer a good question. So you can either email me at teammbs@mbs.works or just drop it into the comments below.